What if the night you thought would be ordinary became the one that changed your life forever? Sarah Martinez believed she knew everything after 8 years working in the emergency room. She thought she could read people, predict outcomes, and keep her personal life completely separate from her professional duties. But what happens when a single night shatters every certainty? What happens when forgiveness, human nature, and the true meaning of healing are no longer theories, but choices that demand an answer in the dead of night? One October evening began as just another shift, but it unraveled into a series of revelations so shocking they would transform not only Sarah's life, but the lives of everyone around her. This is the story of that night, the night that changed everything.
What Sarah didn't know was that her most challenging patient was about to walk through those doors. Sarah Martinez adjusted her scrubs for the third time that evening as she walked through the automatic doors of City General Hospital's emergency department. The familiar antiseptic smell hit her nostrils, a scent that had become as routine as her morning coffee over the past 8 years. At 32, she had seen it all, or so she believed. Gunshot wounds, overdoses, car accidents, domestic violence cases, and everything in between had passed through these doors during her countless night shifts. The October air carried a chill that seemed to seep through the hospital walls, and Sarah found herself wondering, not for the first time, if it was time to consider a different career path. The passion that had once driven her to become a nurse felt distant now, replaced by a mechanical efficiency that got her through each shift, but left her feeling empty. She had been having the same conversation with herself for months. Maybe it was time to try something else, something that didn't involve blood, tears, and the constant weight of other people's suffering. "Another quiet night, I hope," muttered Janet, the outgoing day shift supervisor, as she gathered her belongings from behind the nurses' station. The emergency department was unusually calm for a Tuesday evening, with only a few patients in the waiting area, an elderly man with chest pains, a mother with a feverish toddler, and a teenager who had clearly been in some kind of altercation based on his swollen eye. Sarah nodded absently as she reviewed the patient charts on her tablet. The routine felt suffocating tonight. Check vitals, administer medications, update doctors, comfort families, repeat. She had become so good at compartmentalizing that she could go through an entire shift without really connecting with the human stories behind each medical case. It was a survival mechanism, she told herself, a way to maintain professional distance and avoid burnout. But lately, it felt more like she was sleepwalking through her own life. Dr. Helen Chen appeared from behind the curtained examination area, her graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, despite being the senior physician on duty. At 45, Dr. Chen had been Sarah's mentor during her early years at City General, and there was something about her calm presence that had always made even the most chaotic nights seem manageable. Tonight, however, even Dr. Chen looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from decades of emergency medicine. "Ah, Sarah, good to see you. Should be a relatively easy night. We've got Mrs. Patterson in bed 3 with possible pneumonia, the Morrison kid in bed 1 with what looks like a concussion from football practice, and Mr. Rodriguez in bed 2 waiting for his EKG results." The familiarity of it all felt overwhelming rather than comforting. Sarah found herself thinking about her college roommate who had become a teacher, her sister who worked in marketing, her high school friend who had opened a small bakery. They all seemed to have found ways to make a living that didn't involve constant exposure to human suffering. They went home at the end of the day without carrying the weight of life and death decisions, without wondering if they had done enough, said the right thing, or made the right call. As the evening progressed, Sarah moved through her responsibilities with practiced efficiency. She updated Mr. Rodriguez's family about his stable condition, helped discharge the teenager with instructions for ice and rest, and assisted Dr. Chen with Mrs. Patterson's treatment plan. Each interaction felt hollow, like she was going through the motions of being a nurse without actually being present for any of it. Around 11 o'clock, during a brief lull in activity, Sarah found herself standing at the large windows that overlooked the hospital's emergency entrance. The ambulance bay was empty, the automatic doors closed, and for a moment, everything felt perfectly still. She thought about the incident from the previous week that had been haunting her thoughts. The attempted mugging in the hospital parking garage that had left her shaken and questioning her safety, her judgment, and her future at City General. It had happened so quickly. She was walking to her car after a particularly difficult shift when a young man had approached her from behind the concrete pillars. His face was partially obscured by shadows, but she could see enough to know he was desperate. He had demanded her purse, his voice shaking with what she had interpreted as either drug withdrawal or pure desperation. Sarah had managed to escape by running toward the security booth, her hands trembling for hours afterward. The incident had triggered something in her, not just fear, but a profound sense of disillusionment with the world she had dedicated her career to protecting. If she couldn't even feel safe in her own workplace, if the people she had sworn to help were the same ones who might hurt her, then what was the point of it all? The young man's face had been haunting her dreams, not because of what he had done, but because of the desperation she had seen in his eyes. It was the same desperation she saw in the emergency room every night. But experiencing it as a potential victim rather than a caregiver had fundamentally shifted something inside her. Dr. Chen noticed her standing by the windows and approached quietly. "Everything okay, Sarah? You seem distracted tonight." Sarah turned away from the window, forcing a professional smile. "Just thinking about some changes I might want to make," she said vaguely. "You know how it is, 8 years in the same place, same routine. Sometimes I wonder if I'm making a real difference anymore." Dr. Chen studied her with the kind of perceptive gaze that came from years of reading people in crisis. "I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I can tell you that the moment you stop questioning whether you're making a difference is the moment you should probably find something else to do. The doubt means you still care." Before Sarah could respond, the familiar sound of an ambulance siren pierced the quiet night air. Both women automatically moved into position, their bodies responding to the sound with trained efficiency, even as their minds prepare for whatever trauma was about to come through the doors. "ETA 2 minutes, came the crackled voice over the radio. "Motor vehicle accident, male in his 20s, unconscious, possible head trauma and internal bleeding. Vitals are unstable." Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with every emergency call, but tonight it felt different somehow. More heavy, more significant. As she gathered the necessary supplies and prepared the trauma bay, she had no idea that the patient about to arrive would completely upend everything she thought she knew about justice, forgiveness, and the true meaning of her calling as a healer. The automatic doors burst open as the EMT team rushed in with their patient. Sarah's first glimpse was a young man, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair matted with blood and a face that was swollen and bruised from the impact. His clothes were torn and dirty, typical of a motorcycle accident, and his breathing was shallow and labored. It wasn't until the EMTs transferred him to the examination table and the overhead lights illuminated his features more clearly that Sarah felt her blood run cold. Despite the injuries and swelling, despite the fact that she had only seen him briefly in the shadowy parking garage, she recognized him immediately. This was the man who had tried to rob her just 1 week ago. But Sarah was about to discover something that would make her question everything she thought she knew about that night.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing.
The recognition hit Sarah like a physical blow, causing her to take an involuntary step backward from the examination table. Her hands began to tremble slightly as memories of the previous week flooded back. The fear, the adrenaline, the desperate voice demanding her purse, the way she had run through the parking garage with her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Now here he was, this same young man, lying unconscious and bleeding on the table in front of her. Marcus Williams, according to the identification that EMTs had found in his wallet. 28 years old, no emergency contacts listed, no insurance information. Just a battered leather wallet with a few crumpled bills and a social security card that had seen better days. Dr. Chen was already moving with practiced efficiency, checking his pupils for signs of brain injury, palpating his abdomen for internal bleeding, calling out orders for blood work and imaging studies. "Sarah, I need you to start an IV and get me a full set of vitals," she called out without looking up from her examination. Sarah stood frozen for several seconds, staring at Marcus's unconscious face. In the harsh fluorescent lights of the trauma bay, he looked younger than she had remembered, more vulnerable. His cheekbones were prominent in a way that suggested he hadn't been eating regularly, and there were dark circles under his closed eyes that spoke of exhaustion that went beyond his current injuries. "Sarah!" Dr. Chen's voice cut through her paralysis. "I need that IV now! His blood pressure is dropping!" Professional instinct finally kicked in, overriding Sarah's personal shock. She moved to Marcus's side and began the familiar routine of finding a vein and inserting the IV catheter. Her hands were steadier than she expected, muscle memory taking over even as her mind reeled with the implications of what was happening. As she worked, Sarah found herself studying Marcus's face more closely. Without the shadows and her own fear distorting her perception, she could see details she had missed during their brief encounter. There was a scar along his left temple that looked old, probably from childhood. His hands, now relaxed in unconsciousness, showed calluses that suggested he worked with them regularly. Most surprisingly, there was something almost peaceful about his expression despite his injuries, not the hardened look she might have expected from someone who made a living robbing people. "Pupils are equal and reactive, but I'm concerned about the head injury," Dr. Chen was saying as she continued her examination. "Sarah, I need you to call radiology and tell them we need a stat CT scan. Also call the blood bank. His hemoglobin is low and we may need to cross-match for a transfusion." As Sarah completed the IV insertion and began taking vital signs, she wrestled with an internal debate that felt surreal given the circumstances. Part of her wanted to tell Dr. Chen immediately who this patient was, wanted to call security, wanted to make sure that when Marcus regained consciousness, he would be met by police officers ready to arrest him for attempted robbery. He was a criminal after all. He had threatened her, had made her feel unsafe in her own workplace, had caused her to question her entire career path. But another part of her, the part that had been trained to see every patient as a human being deserving of care regardless of their circumstances, held her back. Looking at Marcus now, broken and bleeding, she found it difficult to reconcile this vulnerable young man with the desperate figure who had demanded her purse in the parking garage. Something about the whole situation felt incomplete, like they were pieces of the story she wasn't seeing. "BP is 80/50 and dropping," Sarah reported, pushing her personal conflict aside to focus on the immediate medical crisis. "Heart rate is 120 and thready, temperature is 97.2. Dr. Chen frowned at the vital signs. "We need to get him to surgery. There's definitely internal bleeding, probably from the spleen, based on the mechanism of injury and where he's tender. Sarah, call Dr. Martinez in surgery and tell them we have a priority case coming up." As Sarah reached for the phone to make the call, she noticed a piece of paper that had fallen from Marcus's jacket pocket when the EMTs had brought him in. Without really thinking about it, she bent to pick it up, intending to place it with his other belongings. But as she unfolded the paper, what she saw made her pause. It was a hospital bill, not from City General, but from Children's Hospital across town. The patient name read Emma Williams, and the charges were staggering. Over $40,000 for what appeared to be oncology treatments, chemotherapy, radiation, surgical procedures, extended hospital stays. The bill was stamped past due in red letters, and there were handwritten notes in the margins that looked like payment plan negotiations. Sarah stared at the bill, her mind racing. Emma Williams, a child, presumably Marcus's relative, sister, maybe, or daughter? The dates on the treatments went back over 6 months, with the most recent charges from just 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, right just around the time Marcus had started appearing in the hospital parking garage, lurking around the edges of her awareness before finally working up the courage or desperation to attempt the robbery. "Sarah!" Dr. Chen's voice cut through her paralysis. "I need you to make that call to surgery." "Making it now," Sarah replied, quickly folding the bill and placing it with Marcus's other belongings. But her hands were shaking again, and this time it wasn't from fear or anger. It was from the dawning realization that the story she had been telling herself about what happened in the parking garage might be much more complicated than she had originally thought. As she dialed the extension for the surgical department, she found herself looking at Marcus with new eyes. The calloused hands that suggested honest work, the worn clothes that spoke of financial hardship rather than criminal lifestyle, and the peaceful expression that seemed more consistent with exhaustion than malice. And now, the hospital bill that painted a picture of a family in crisis, facing impossible medical expenses and limited options. Dr. Martinez, this is Sarah in the ER. Dr. Chen needs you for an emergency surgery. Motor vehicle accident with probable splenic rupture. As she relayed the medical information, her mind was working through a different kind of problem entirely. If Marcus was dealing with crushing medical bills for a child's cancer treatment, if he was working legitimate jobs but still couldn't make ends meet, if he was watching someone he loved suffer while being unable to afford the care she needed, then the desperate young man who had approached her in the parking garage began to make sense in a way that was both heartbreaking and terrifying. It didn't excuse what he had done, but it explained it in a way that made Sarah feel sick to her stomach. How many times had she seen families in similar situations right here in the emergency room? How many times had she watched parents choose between paying for their child's medication or paying for groceries? How many times had she seen good people pushed to the breaking point by medical bills that seemed designed to destroy lives rather than save them? After completing the call to surgery, Sarah stood beside Marcus's gurney as Dr. Chen finished her examination and the radiology tech arrived to take him for a CT scan. In a few minutes, he would be wheeled away to the operating room where Dr. Martinez would try to repair whatever damage the motorcycle accident had done to his internal organs. And Sarah would be left with the knowledge that she might be watching the last few hours of a young man whose only crime was loving someone enough to risk everything to save them. The good news is that his neuro exam is better than I initially thought, Dr. Chen said quietly as the radiology tech prepared to transport Marcus. The head injury doesn't appear to be as severe as we first suspected. If we can get the internal bleeding under control, he should have a good chance of recovery. Sarah nodded, but she found herself wondering what kind of recovery awaited Marcus even if the surgery was successful. Would he wake up to police officers and arrest warrants? Would he face charges that would make it even more impossible for him to help Emma with her medical bills? Would his desperate attempt to save a child's life ultimately destroy any chance he had of actually helping her? As Marcus was wheeled away to radiology and then to surgery, Sarah was left alone with her thoughts and a growing sense that nothing about that night was going to be as simple as she had originally believed. She had expected to feel vindicated by seeing her attacker brought low, had thought there would be some satisfaction in knowing that he was facing consequences for his actions. Instead, she felt hollow and confused, like the ground beneath her feet had shifted in ways she didn't fully understand yet. The ERD returned to its previous quiet state, but Sarah found herself unable to concentrate on her other patients. Every few minutes she would check with the surgical department for updates on Marcus's condition, telling herself it was just professional concern, but knowing there was something deeper driving her need to know how his story would end. What she didn't know was that the biggest revelations were still to come. What happened next would make Sarah realize that everything she thought she understood about that night was completely wrong.
3 hours later, as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky outside the emergency room windows, Sarah received word that Marcus's surgery had been successful. Dr. Martinez had managed to repair the damage to his spleen and stop the internal bleeding. And while Marcus would need several days of recovery, he was expected to make a full physical recovery. Sarah found herself standing outside the recovery room, staring through the small window at Marcus's sleeping form. He looked even younger now, with the tension of pain and trauma erased from his features by the anesthesia. Various monitors beeped quietly around his bed, tracking his vital signs and ensuring that his recovery remained on track. Dr. Chen appeared beside her, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the machine down the hall. "Thought you could use this," she said, offering one of the cups to Sarah. "You've seemed unusually invested in this case tonight." Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm cup and using the heat to combat the chill she felt that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. "There's something I need to tell you about him," she said quietly, not taking her eyes off Marcus's still form. "I'm listening." Sarah took a deep breath and told Dr. Chen about the incident in the parking garage the previous week. She described the fears she had felt, the way the encounter had shaken her confidence and made her question her safety at work. She explained how seeing Marcus as a patient had initially filled her with a complex mix of emotions, anger, fear, and a disturbing sense of poetic justice that she now felt ashamed of. Dr. Chen listened without interruption, her expression growing more thoughtful as Sarah's story unfolded. When Sarah finished, Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus through the window. That must have been incredibly difficult, both the original incident and then having to treat him tonight. I can't imagine what that felt like. The thing is, Sarah continued, I found this hospital bill in his belongings from Children's Hospital for someone named Emma Williams. Cancer treatments, over $40,000 in past due charges. She pulled the folded paper from her pocket and handed it to Dr. Chen. Dr. Chen examined the bill carefully, her eyebrows rising as she took in the extent of the charges and the duration of the treatment. This is for a child, leukemia from the look of these treatment codes. Recent treatments too. I keep thinking about it, about what would drive someone to do what he did. And looking at this bill, I think I might understand. Understanding doesn't excuse it, but it does add context that changes how we see the whole situation. Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Janet, the day shift supervisor who had left hours earlier. Sarah, I meant to mention earlier, there was a police officer here this afternoon asking questions about a hit-and-run accident from last night. Said they were looking for witnesses. Thought you might want to know. Sarah frowned, showing the message to Dr. Chen. Hit and run? But Marcus was in a single-vehicle accident. The EMTs said he hit a tree on Cedar Street. Dr. Chen's expression grew more serious. Maybe we should call the police department and find out what they know about Marcus's accident. If there are discrepancies in the story, we need to understand what really happened. 20 minutes later, Officer Rodriguez from the city police department arrived at the hospital. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes who had worked with the hospital staff on numerous cases over the years. Sarah and Dr. Chen met with him in the small conference room adjacent to the recovery ward. We've been investigating a hit-and-run accident that occurred around midnight on Cedar Street. The victim was an elderly woman named Maria Santos. She was crossing the street when she was struck by a vehicle that fled the scene. We found debris from a motorcycle at the accident site, and based on witness descriptions, we believe the rider may have been injured in the collision. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Are you saying that Marcus, our patient, was involved in hitting this woman? We think it's possible, Officer Rodriguez said carefully. The timing and location match up with where your patient was found. But here's the interesting thing. We also have witness reports that the motorcycle rider returned to the scene about 10 minutes later. Several people saw him trying to help Mrs. Santos, calling for an ambulance, staying with her until paramedics arrived. He came back. He not only came back, but according to witnesses, he was clearly injured from the collision, bleeding, disoriented, but he ignored his own condition to make sure Mrs. Santos got help. He only left when the ambulance arrived and started treating her, and even then, several witnesses said he seemed reluctant to go. Sarah stared at Officer Rodriguez, trying to process this information. So he hit her accidentally, then came back to help? That's what it looks like. Mrs. Santos is in intensive care at Memorial Hospital, but she's stable. The witnesses all described the motorcycle rider as being extremely distressed about what happened, not trying to avoid responsibility, but seeming genuinely devastated that he had hurt someone. Officer Rodriguez paused, consulting his notes. There's more. We tracked down some security footage from a business near the accident scene. It shows that Mrs. Santos was actually crossing against the light, and the motorcycle was traveling within the speed limit. It was dark, raining slightly, and she was wearing dark clothing. The accident appears to have been unavoidable. But if it was an accident and he came back to help, why did witnesses report it as a hit and run? Because by the time patrol units arrived at the scene, he was gone. The witnesses who saw him leave didn't stick around to explain what they had observed to the first officers on the scene. It wasn't until we started interviewing people more thoroughly that we got the full picture. Sarah felt like the room was spinning slightly. Every assumption that she had made about Marcus was being systematically dismantled. First the hospital bill that suggested a desperately legitimate reason for his attempt at robbery, now evidence that he was the kind of person who would risk his own safety to help a stranger even after being involved in an accident that wasn't his fault. "Officer Rodriguez," she said slowly, "is there anything else you can tell us about Marcus? Any criminal history, outstanding warrants, anything like that?"
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Marcus regained consciousness slowly, his eyelids fluttering as the anesthesia wore off. Sarah was checking his vital signs when she noticed a change in his breathing pattern that indicated he was beginning to wake up. She had volunteered to take over his post-operative care, telling herself it was just professional thoroughness, but knowing there were deeper reasons she couldn't yet articulate. "Take your time," she said softly, as Marcus's eyes opened and tried to focus on his surroundings. "You're in the hospital. You were in an accident, but you're going to be okay." Marcus blinked several times, his gaze moving around the room before settling on Sarah's face. For a moment, there was no recognition, just the confused disorientation of someone emerging from surgery. Then his eyes widened slightly, and Sarah saw the exact moment when he realized who she was. But instead of fear or anger or embarrassment, all emotions Sarah might have expected, Marcus's expression filled with something that looked almost like relief. "You?" he whispered, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube that had been removed earlier. I hoped I might see you again." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "Marcus, I know who you are. I know what happened in the parking garage last week." "I know you do." Marcus tried to shift position and winced as the movement pulled at his surgical incisions. "I was hoping you would remember me." "Remember you?" Sarah stared at him in confusion. "What do you mean?" Marcus closed his eyes for a moment as if gathering strength for what he was about to say. "You probably don't recall every patient you've treated over the years. There are so many. But you took care of my sister Emma about 6 months ago. She was here for 3 days with complications from her chemotherapy." Sarah felt the world tilt slightly. Emma was here? At City General? Room 314 in the pediatric ward. She had developed pneumonia as a complication from her treatments at Children's Hospital. You were working an extra shift up there because they were short-staffed. You sat with her during her fever spikes. You brought her ice chips when she couldn't keep water down. You helped her video call with her class when she was feeling better. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "She talked about you constantly after we got home. The nice nurse Sarah who had told her stories about traveling to places she wanted to visit someday." Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe properly. She did remember Emma Williams now. A bright, brave little girl who had been so sick but had maintained such a positive attitude that she had impressed all the staff. Sarah had indeed worked extra shifts in the pediatric ward during a staffing shortage, and there had been a little girl with leukemia who had captured everyone's hearts with her courage and optimism. "Emma talked about you all the time," Marcus continued. "She said you were the kindest person she had ever met. She said you made her feel less scared about being sick." "I remember her," Sarah whispered. She was special. So brave." "When she died 3 weeks ago," Marcus said, his voice breaking, "the last thing she talked about was wanting to say thank you to Nurse Sarah. She was worried that you might not know how much her kindness meant to her." Sarah felt tears starting to run down her cheeks. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I tried to find you after the funeral. I called the hospital, but they said they couldn't give out personal information about employees. I went to the Human Resources Department, but they said I would have to write a letter and they would forward it, and I needed to thank you in person. Emma had made me promise." Sarah stared at him, beginning to understand but not wanting to believe what she was hearing. "I started hanging around the hospital.
I knew you worked night shifts, so I would wait in the parking garage hoping to see you. I must have been there 4 or 5 times before I finally worked up the courage to approach you. The night you tried to rob me, Sarah said slowly. I wasn't trying to rob you. I was trying to talk to you. But when I saw you walking toward your car alone in that dark parking garage, I realized how it would look, a strange man approaching you at night. I panicked. I thought if I didn't say something right then, I might never get another chance to keep my promise to Emma. Sarah felt like the room was spinning. But you demanded my purse. I asked if you were Sarah Martinez. You looked terrified and started backing away, and I realized how frightening I must have seemed. I was trying to explain about Emma, but you looked so scared that I panicked and said something stupid about needing money for my sister's medical bills. I don't know what I thought. I guess I thought if you understood why I needed to talk to you, you might not be so frightened. But I ran away. You ran away, and I felt horrible. I had promised Emma I would thank you, and instead I had scared you half to death. I went home and didn't sleep for days trying to figure out how to fix what I had done. Sarah sank into the chair beside Marcus's bed, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. Everything she had believed about that night, everything that had driven her to question her career and her safety, had been on a complete misunderstanding. Marcus, she said slowly, are you telling me that you never intended to rob me, that you were just trying to thank me for taking care of Emma? I would never hurt you, Marcus said with such sincerity that Sarah felt her remaining doubts crumble. Oh God, Marcus, I was so scared. I was going to quit my job. I was going to leave nursing because of what I thought had happened. Please don't, Marcus said urgently, trying to sit up despite his surgical restrictions. Emma always said she wanted to be a nurse like you when she grew up. She said you were proof that there were still good people in the world who cared about helping others. The irony of the situation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had been ready to abandon the profession that had allowed her to touch Emma's life in such a meaningful way, all because of a misunderstanding that had grown out of Marcus's desire to honor his sister's memory. The night of your accident, Sarah said, wiping tears from her eyes, were you coming to the hospital that tried to talk to me again?
Marcus shook his head. I was taking Emma's things to donate to the children's wing at Memorial Hospital. Emma had wanted her toys and books to go to other sick kids. But I had to drive past City General to get there, and I kept thinking about how I had failed to keep my promise to her. I was crying while I was driving, not paying attention like I should have been. That's when you hit Mrs. Santos. I never saw her until it was too late. The street was dark, it was raining a little, and she was crossing against the light wearing dark clothes. But that doesn't matter. I was the one behind the handlebars. I was the one who hurt her. But you went back to help her. Marcus looked confused. Of course I went back. She was lying in the street because of me. I couldn't just leave her there. Even though you were injured yourself. I've been injured before. She was an elderly woman who was hurt because I wasn't paying attention. There was no question about going back. Sarah stared at Marcus, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. This wasn't a criminal, or a threat, or someone to be feared. This was a young man who had lost the most important person in his world and had been trying desperately to honor her memory by expressing gratitude to someone who had shown her kindness. His every action, from working extra shifts to try to pay Emma's medical bills, to risking his own safety to help a stranger he had accidentally injured, spoke to a character that was fundamentally good, even when broken by grief and desperation. Marcus, she said softly, I owe you the biggest apology of my life. You don't owe me anything. You saved Emma's life more than once during those 3 days she was here. You gave her comfort when she was in pain and hope when she was scared. You did your job the way it's supposed to be done, and she never forgot that. Sarah felt a profound shift occurring within her, as if all the pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even realized she was solving were suddenly falling into place. The dissatisfaction she had been feeling with her work, the sense that she wasn't making a real difference, the feeling that her profession had become routine and meaningless, all of that was being rewritten by the knowledge of how her care had affected one brave little girl and her devoted brother. "There's something else," Marcus said hesitantly. "Something I need to tell you about Emma." Sarah looked up, wondering what other revelations this night could possibly hold. "The day before she died, when she was barely conscious and the doctors said she probably couldn't hear us anymore, she whispered your name. She said, 'Tell Nurse Sarah that she was right about the places I wanted to visit. I can see them now, and they're even more beautiful than she described.'" The words hit Sarah with such emotional force that she had to grip the arms of her chair to steady herself. She remembered the conversations with Emma about travel, about all the places a curious 8-year-old dreamed of seeing someday. Sarah had described Paris and London and the beaches of Hawaii, trying to give Emma something beautiful to think about during the darkest moments of her treatment. "She said that?" Sarah whispered. "Those were almost her last words," Marcus confirmed. "That and asking me to make sure I thanked you properly for everything you had done for her." Sarah broke down completely then, sobbing for Emma, for Marcus, for all the pain and misunderstanding that had shaped the past few weeks. But she was also crying for relief, and from a profound sense of purpose that she hadn't felt in years. Emma's memory wasn't just a tragic story. It was a reminder of why Sarah had become a nurse in the first place, and why that calling was more important than she had allowed herself to remember. But there was one more truth that would tie everything together in a way no one could have predicted.
As Sarah sat crying beside Marcus's bed, Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway. She had been checking on other patients, but had heard voices from Marcus's room and wanted to ensure everything was all right. Seeing Sarah's tears, she immediately moved to her side with concern. "Sarah, what's happening? Is everything okay?" Through her tears, Sarah managed to explain what Marcus had just told her. She described how her understanding of the parking garage incident had been completely wrong, how Marcus had been trying to thank her for caring for his sister, how Emma had died thinking of the kindness Sarah had shown her during her hospital stay. Dr. Chen listened with growing amazement, occasionally glancing at Marcus, who had closed his eyes but was clearly following the conversation. When Sarah finished her explanation, Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful and increasingly troubled. "Sarah," Dr. Chen said slowly, "I need to tell you something. Something I should have mentioned hours ago, but I couldn't bring myself to say it." Both Sarah and Marcus looked at Dr. Chen, sensing that whatever she was about to reveal would be significant. "I know about Emma Williams," Dr. Chen continued, her voice heavy with emotion. "I was the attending physician who made the decision to transfer her back to Children's Hospital when her condition stabilized here 6 months ago." Sarah frowned, not understanding why this information seemed to be causing Dr. Chen such distress. That would have been the appropriate medical decision. Children's Hospital has this specialized oncology unit. "It was the appropriate medical decision," Dr. Chen agreed. "But it wasn't the only factor in my choice." She moved to the window, looking out at the lightning sky as if she couldn't bear to meet either of their eyes. Emma's family had no insurance. The bills for her 3-day stay here had already reached nearly $15,000. I knew that if I kept her here longer, if I continued to provide the level of care she needed, the financial burden would have been devastating. Marcus opened his eyes, focusing on Dr. Chen with new attention. "So I convinced myself that transferring her was purely a medical decision. I told myself that she would receive better, specialized care at Children's Hospital. But the truth was, I also knew that transferring her would make her financial situation someone else's problem." "Dr. Chen," Sarah said softly, "you couldn't have known."
But I did know, Dr. Chen interrupted. I knew that Children's Hospital would provide care regardless of ability to pay, but I also knew that they would pursue payment aggressively afterward. I knew that this family would be crushed by medical debt, and I made the decision to transfer Emma anyway because it was easier for me and for this hospital's budget. The room fell silent except for the quiet beeping of Marcus's monitors. Sarah began to understand the weight of what Dr. Chen was revealing. 3 weeks ago, Dr. Chen continued, I received a call from a physician at Children's Hospital. He was calling to inform me that Emma Williams had died and to ask if I remembered her case from her stay here 6 months earlier. He told me that her family had exhausted every resource trying to pay for her treatments, that her brother had worked multiple jobs and taken out loans and done everything humanly possible to cover the costs. Marcus was staring at Dr. Chen now with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. The physician at Children's Hospital called me because he wanted to know if there was any way we could have provided more comprehensive care here, if there were any programs or resources that might have helped Emma's family manage the financial burden. He was calling because he felt guilty about the outcome, and he wanted to know if we shared any responsibility for what had happened. And do we? Sarah asked quietly. Dr. Chen's voice broke slightly. I looked into it after that phone call 3 weeks ago. If I had kept Emma here and worked with our financial assistance programs, if I had connected the family with our social services department, if I had been more concerned with providing care than protecting our bottom line, we could have covered most of her treatment costs. We could have saved that family from financial ruin. The implications of this revelation settled over the room like a heavy weight. Marcus had been driven to desperate measures not because he was a criminal, but because the medical system had failed his family when they needed it most. The debt that had pushed him to beg for money in parking lots, the financial pressure that had ultimately led to his misunderstood encounter with Sarah, could have been avoided if Dr. Chen had made different choices 6 months earlier. Marcus, Dr. Chen said, finally looking directly at him, I am so sorry. I failed you and Emma when you needed help the most. I made decisions based on financial considerations rather than patient care, and those decisions contributed to the tragedy of Emma's death and everything that followed. Marcus was quiet for a long time, his eyes moving between Dr. Chen and Sarah. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but filled with exhaustion. Dr. Chen, he said, you did what you thought was right at the time. Emma received good care here, and she always spoke highly of everyone who treated her. She never blamed anyone for what happened to her. But I blamed myself, Dr. Chen admitted. And when Officer Rodriguez told us earlier about your lack of criminal history, about how you had been working extra shifts to try to pay Emma's bills, about how you had been described as one of the most reliable employees your company had ever seen until you started missing work to spend time with Emma in her final weeks, all of that painted a picture of someone who had been destroyed by a system that should have helped him. Sarah looked between Marcus and Dr. Chen, understanding now that the events of this night had brought together 3 people who were all connected by Emma's story, all carrying guilt and regret about different aspects of how it had ended. There's more, Dr. Chen continued. After that phone call 3 weeks ago, I started looking into our hospital's financial assistance programs. I discovered that we routinely write off millions of dollars in care for patients who can't pay, but we do a terrible job of connecting eligible families with those programs before they go into debt. You're changing the system? Sarah asked. I'm trying to. It's too late for Emma and too late for Marcus, but maybe it won't be too late for the next family who finds themselves in a similar situation. Marcus was staring at Dr. Chen with an expression that had shifted from exhaustion to something approaching hope. You're doing that because of Emma? I'm doing it because Emma's death made me realize that I had lost sight of why I became a doctor in the first place. I'd started thinking of patients as financial liabilities
rather than human beings who deserve the best care I could provide, regardless of their ability to pay. Sarah felt the profound interconnectedness of everything that had happened over the past few hours. Marcus's attempt to honor Emma's memory by thanking her had been misunderstood, leading to weeks of fear and career doubt. But that misunderstanding had ultimately brought all three of them together in a way that was creating positive change from the tragedy of Emma's death. "Marcus," Sarah said, "Emma's last message about thanking me properly, I think this conversation is exactly what she meant. Not just words of gratitude, but helping all of us understand how her life and death have affected everyone who knew her." Marcus nodded weakly, his eyes filling with tears. "She always said that even when bad things happen, good people will find ways to make something beautiful come from the sadness. I never understood what she meant until now."
6 months later, the Emma Williams Memorial Financial Assistance Program at City General Hospital had helped over 200 families avoid the kind of medical debt that had devastated Marcus's life. Dr. Chen had worked tirelessly with hospital administration to streamline the process of connecting patients with financial resources, and the program had become a model that other hospitals across the state were beginning to adopt. Marcus had recovered completely from his injuries and had taken a job as a patient advocate within the program that bore Emma's name. His experience navigating the medical system as a family member, combined with his natural compassion and understanding of financial desperation, made him uniquely qualified to help other families facing similar crises. Every day, he helped people understand their options and connect with resources that could prevent them from making the kind of desperate choices he had been driven to make. Sarah had not only decided to remain in nursing, but had also enrolled in a graduate program to become a nurse practitioner specializing in pediatric oncology. Her experience with Emma, combined with everything she had learned about how the medical system could fail vulnerable families, had inspired her to pursue advanced training that would allow her to provide more comprehensive care. She had also become a mentor for new nurses, teaching them about the lasting impact they could have on patients and families, even during brief encounters. The three of them met regularly at a small cafe near the hospital, not as patient and caregivers, but as friends united by their shared commitment to Emma's memory. These conversations had become a source of healing for all of them, a way to process the complex emotions and lessons that had emerged from that transformative night in the emergency room. Dr. Chen had undergone her own transformation, stepping back from administrative responsibilities to focus more directly on patient care. She had become a vocal advocate within the medical community for addressing the financial barriers that prevented people from accessing necessary care. Her presentations at medical conferences about the Emma Williams case had sparked discussions at hospitals nationwide about the ethical obligations of healthcare providers when treating uninsured patients. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in how all three of them approached their daily work. Sarah found herself paying closer attention to the family members who sat in waiting rooms, recognizing that they might be carrying burdens she couldn't see. Marcus made it his mission to ensure that no family left the hospital without understanding all their financial options and resources. Dr. Chen had learned to see each patient as a complete human being with a complex story, not just a medical case to be managed efficiently. The ripple effects of Emma's story continued to spread in ways that none of them could have anticipated. The families helped by the financial assistance program often became advocates themselves, sharing information about available resources with friends and community members who found themselves facing medical crises. Healthcare workers at other hospitals began implementing similar screening and assistance programs after hearing about City General's success. Marcus often reflected on Emma's final words about being able to see beautiful places. He had come to understand that she hadn't just been referring to some spiritual vision of the afterlife, but to the beautiful changes that would grow from her story. The program that bore her name, the families it helped, the healthcare workers who recommitted to their calling, the systemic changes that were spreading to other institutions, all of this was Emma's legacy, the beautiful places her memory had created. Sarah kept a small photo of Emma in her locker, not as a reminder of loss, but as a symbol of the profound impact that genuine caring could have on another person's life. Every time she felt overwhelmed by the routine aspects of her job, she would look at Emma's smiling face and remember that even small acts of kindness could echo through time in ways she might never fully understand.
The misunderstanding that had brought them all together had taught them that truth is often more complex than initial appearances suggest, that good people can be driven to desperate actions by impossible circumstances, and that healing, both physical and emotional, often requires understanding the complete story, rather than judging based on limited information. Most importantly, they had all learned that the most profound changes often emerge from the most painful experiences, and that honoring someone's memory sometimes means being willing to transform yourself and your understanding of the world. Emma's brief life had touched each of them in different ways, but her death had challenged all of them to become better versions of themselves and to create systems that would prevent other families from facing the same impossible choices that had defined Marcus's experience. As Sarah began another night shift at City General, she carried with her not the fear and disillusionment that had once threatened to drive her from nursing, but a renewed sense of purpose and a deep understanding of the responsibility that came with being trusted to care for people during their most vulnerable moments. She had learned that sometimes the most important healing happens not in the body, but in the connections between people who choose to see beyond surface appearances to the complex humanity underneath. The emergency room doors opened to admit another ambulance, another patient, another family facing crisis and uncertainty. But Sarah approached this next case with the knowledge that every person who came through those doors carried a story worth understanding, and that her response to their needs might create ripples that would extend far beyond anything she could imagine. Emma had taught her that being a nurse meant more than treating symptoms or following protocols. It meant recognizing the sacred trust that patients placed in her hands and responding with the kind of compassionate care that could literally change lives. This was Emma's final gift to all of them, the understanding that ordinary people, through their choice to care genuinely for others, could create extraordinary healing that extended far beyond the walls of any hospital. And in that understanding, Sarah found not just renewed purpose in her profession, but a deeper appreciation for the mysterious ways that love and loss, mistakes and forgiveness, individual choices and systemic change could weave together to create something beautiful, even from the most painful circumstances. The night shift began, and Sarah was ready.
1 year after that transformative October night, Sarah stood in the same emergency room where everything had changed. But the woman looking back at her from the reflection in the darkened windows was barely recognizable as the person who had once considered abandoning nursing altogether. She wore the same scrubs, worked the same shift, and moved through the same corridors, but everything about how she experienced her work had been fundamentally altered. The Emma Williams Memorial Financial Assistance Program had grown beyond anyone's initial expectations. What had started as a simple protocol change at City General Hospital had evolved into a comprehensive support system that addressed not just financial barriers to healthcare, but emotional and social barriers as well. The program now employed 12 full-time staff members, including Marcus, and had helped over 800 families navigate medical crises without falling into the kind of devastating debt that had once defined his family's experience. But the program's success was measured in more than just numbers. Sarah had seen firsthand how it had changed the culture of the entire hospital. Nurses, doctors, and support staff had begun approaching their work with a heightened awareness of the complete human stories behind each medical case. The program had created a ripple effect that touched every aspect of patient care, from how intake interviews were conducted to how discharge planning addressed long-term financial sustainability. Marcus had become something of a legend within the hospital community. His gentle manner and intuitive understanding of family dynamics made him extraordinarily effective at connecting with people who are facing their darkest moments. Patients and family members trusted him in ways that sometimes even surprised experienced medical professionals, perhaps sensing that he truly understood what it felt like to watch someone you love suffer while feeling powerless to help them. His work had expanded beyond individual case management to include community outreach and education. Marcus regularly spoke at community centers, churches, and schools about healthcare advocacy and resource navigation. He had developed partnerships with local organizations to create support networks for families dealing with serious illnesses, ensuring that no one had to face medical crises in the isolation that had once characterized his own experience. Dr. Chen had undergone her own profound professional renewal. Her decision to step back from administrative responsibilities and refocus on direct patient care had reinvigorated her passion for medicine in ways she hadn't experienced since her residency training.
She had become a mentor for younger physicians, teaching them not just medical protocols, but also the importance of seeing each patient as a complete human being with complex needs that extended beyond their immediate medical complaints. Her research into healthcare accessibility and financial barriers had gained national attention. She had published several papers on the Emma Williams case study, examining how small policy changes at the institutional level could create dramatic improvements in patient outcomes and family stability. Medical schools across the country had begun incorporating her work into their curricula, ensuring that future physicians would be better prepared to address the social determinants of health that often influence medical outcomes more than purely clinical factors. The cafe where the three of them met regularly had become an informal headquarters for discussing new initiatives and reflecting on the ongoing impact of Emma's story. Their monthly conversations had evolved into a kind of think tank for healthcare advocacy, with each of them bringing different perspectives and experiences to bear on the challenges they encountered in their work. During one of these meetings, Marcus had shared a story that perfectly encapsulated how far they had all come. A young father had approached him in a hospital lobby, tears streaming down his face as he explained that his daughter had just been diagnosed with a rare genetic condition that would require years of expensive treatments. The man had been preparing to take out a second mortgage on his house, convinced the financial ruin was inevitable. Marcus spent 3 hours with the family that day, walking them through every available resource and assistance program, connecting them with specialists who could provide care within their means, and helping them develop a comprehensive plan that would allow them to focus on their daughter's health rather than worrying about bankruptcy. By the time Marcus finished working with them, the family had a clear path forward that wouldn't destroy their financial stability. The father kept thanking me, Marcus had told Sarah and Dr. Chen, and all I could think about was how Emma would have been so happy to know that her story was preventing another family from going through what we went through. Sarah had been accepted into a competitive pediatric nurse practitioner program and was balancing her graduate studies with her continued work in the emergency room. Her research project focused on developing screening tools that could help healthcare providers identify families who might be at risk for financial hardship related to medical care. The goal was to intervene earlier in the process, connecting families with resources before they reached the point of desperation that once drove Marcus to such extreme measures. Her clinical rotations had taken her back to the pediatric ward where she had first met Emma, and she found herself thinking often about the little girl whose brief life had created such far-reaching changes. Sarah had requested Emma's medical records from her stay at City General, not for research purposes, but because she wanted to remember more clearly the conversations and interactions that meant so much to both Emma and Marcus. Reading through the nursing notes she had written during those 3 days, she was struck by how routine and clinical they seemed. Standard observations about vital signs, medication administration, patient comfort measures. Nothing in those notes captured the profound impact that those interactions had apparently had on a frightened little girl facing an uncertain future. It was a humbling reminder that the most meaningful aspects of healthcare often happened in the spaces between formal medical procedures, in the moments of human connection that rarely made it into official documentation. The pediatric oncology unit had established a small garden area that served as a memorial to Emma and other young patients who had lost their battles with cancer. Marcus had been involved in designing the space, working with landscape architects to create an area that would provide comfort and hope for current patients and their families. The garden featured a small plaque with Emma's favorite quote, something she had apparently said to Marcus during one of her most difficult treatment days. Even when everything feels broken, people can choose to be beautiful to each other. The Emma Williams Memorial Garden had become a gathering place for families dealing with childhood cancer, offering a peaceful space for reflection and connection with others who understood their journey. Support groups met there regularly, and Marcus often facilitated discussions that helped parents process the complex emotions that came with watching their children face serious illnesses. The garden had also become a place where healthcare workers came to reflect on their own experiences and reconnect with their sense of purpose. Sarah often spent her lunch breaks there, using the quiet space to process particularly difficult cases or to simply remember why she had chosen nursing. One afternoon, while sitting in Emma's garden, Sarah had been approached by a young nursing student who was completing her pediatric rotation. The student had heard about the Emma Williams story and wanted to understand how it had influenced Sarah's approach to patient care. As Sarah shared the story, she realized how much her own understanding of it continued to evolve. "The most important thing I learned," Sarah told the nursing student, "is that we never really know the complete story of the people we're caring for. Emma seemed like just another pediatric patient when she was here,
But her life and death created changes that are still rippling outward a year later. It taught me to treat every interaction as if it might be the most important moment in someone's life, because sometimes it actually is. The nursing student had asked Sarah what she would say to Emma now, if she could have one more conversation with her. The question had surprised Sarah, and she had found herself thinking about it for days afterward. If she could speak to Emma again, Sarah thought, she would thank her for the lesson about how love creates resilience. How even in the face of impossible circumstances, people could choose to focus on gratitude and hope rather than bitterness and despair. Emma's ability to maintain her positive outlook despite her illness, her concern for others, even while facing her own mortality, and her determination that Marcus should express appreciation to the people who had helped her, all of this demonstrated a kind of wisdom that transcended her 8 years of life. Sarah would tell Emma that her brother had kept his promise and more, that the thank you message had not only been delivered, but had transformed the lives of everyone who heard it. She would describe the garden that bore Emma's name, the families who had been helped by the assistance program, the healthcare workers who had recommitted to their calling because of her story. Most importantly, Sarah would want Emma to know that her belief in the goodness of people had been proven right. Despite all the system failures and misunderstandings that had complicated her family's story, the ultimate outcome had been a demonstration of humanity's capacity for growth, forgiveness, and positive change. The 1-year anniversary of that October night fell on a Tuesday, and Sarah found herself working the same shift in the same emergency room where everything had begun. As if the universe had a sense of poetic symmetry, the night brought an unusual number of cases that seemed designed to test everything she had learned about seeing beyond surface appearances to understand the complete human stories behind each medical emergency. A teenage girl arrived with what appeared to be drug overdose symptoms, but careful questioning revealed that she had been self-medicating with stolen prescription drugs to manage chronic pain from an untreated medical condition. Her family had no insurance, and she had been afraid to seek medical help because of previous negative experiences with healthcare providers who had dismissed her complaints. An elderly man was brought in by police after being found wandering in a confused state, and initial assessments suggested dementia or psychiatric illness. However, Sarah's thorough examination revealed signs of severe dehydration and malnutrition. Further investigation showed that he had been rationing his medications and skipping meals to make his limited income stretch far enough to cover his rent. His apparent confusion was actually the result of treatable medical conditions exacerbated by poverty. A young mother arrived with chest pains that emergency room staff initially attributed to anxiety or panic attacks. Sarah's careful history-taking revealed that the woman had been working 3 jobs to support her children as a single parent, getting less than 4 hours of sleep per night, and consuming dangerous amounts of caffeine to maintain her schedule. Her chest pains were real and potentially serious, but the underlying cause was a socioeconomic situation that was literally killing her. Each of these cases required not just medical intervention, but also connection with social services, financial assistance programs, and community resources. Sarah found herself thinking about how differently she might approach these patients a year earlier, before Emma's story had taught her to look beyond immediate medical symptoms to understand the broader context of each person's life. As her shift ended and dawn began to break over the city, Sarah realized that the true measure of transformation wasn't in the dramatic moments or the life-changing revelations, but in the accumulation of small choices to see people more completely, to respond with greater compassion, and to use her position as a healthcare provider to address not just physical symptoms, but human suffering in all its complexity. The Emma Williams Memorial Financial Assistance Program would continue to grow and help more families. Marcus would continue to serve as a bridge between the medical system and the communities it served.
Dr. Chen would continue to advocate for systemic changes that prioritized patient welfare over institutional convenience. But beyond all the formal programs and policy changes, Emma's most lasting legacy might be the reminder that individual human connections still mattered immensely, that small acts of kindness could echo through time in unpredictable ways, and that the choice to see and respond to the complete humanity of every person we encounter was itself a form of healing that extended far beyond any medical intervention. As Sarah walked through the hospital parking garage where the entire story had begun, she felt no trace of the fear that at once made her consider abandoning her profession. Instead, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought her to this point, and a renewed commitment to approach each day with the kind of open-hearted attention that Emma had inspired in everyone who had known her story. The automatic doors of City General Hospital opened to admit the morning shift, and Sarah headed home with the knowledge that she would return the next night, ready to discover whatever new stories and opportunities for connection awaited her.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.